We, like a bunch of drowned rats, show up into the newsroom, and there's one reporter on it. She's going out of her mind because the entire city is flooded. I mean, the subways are flooded. The entire city's a mess.
Every reporter from your country says you're going to win the gold medal, and they do it for every person from every country.
Your treatment is in accord with how well your manager or agent can negotiate your contract.
Everything I do is always inspired by some actual happening. And that is what makes it funny, if you recognize it.
My first director was a giant, maybe the best, John Ford. You stood at attention when he gave you an order.
Truman Capote once said, "A conversation is a dialogue, not a monologue." That's why there are so few good conversations. Due to scarcity, two intelligent talkers seldom meet. Hello, I'm George Orr. In 1988 through 1990, a television series called Conversation interviewed more than 100 high-profile individuals in the arts, business, politics, sports, and the media. Conversation Snapshots will provide you glimpses into these original programs. These short vignettes will both entertain you and provide you with a better appreciation for these intriguing individuals. On this program, the snapshots captured from the past will be former CBC News anchor and reporter Kevin Evans, pianist and humorist Victor Borg, one of Canada's premier Olympic athletes during the 1970s, high jumper Debbie Brill, Cameron Mitchell, one of Hollywood's great character actors, and actor and director Bill Duke.
As an actor, in terms of your function, you're just a small part of a large fabric. You're just a small little, piece that fits in. And you're responsible basically for your lines and doing a good job. And your treatment is in accord with how well your manager or agent can negotiate your contract. If you don't have a great deal, you can be getting dressed in a hallway. If your deal is better, you may have a little honey wagon. If your deal is even better, you may have a motorhome. Mm-hmm. So you're looking at it from a negotiated point of view. You're always going to do basically the same job. You're given lines. The director has a concept. You apply your talents to his concept and try to give him a little extra if you can, and that's what you do basically.
It's several months out of your life, though, working on a project such as Bird on a Wire.
Several months out of your life in a beautiful city like Vancouver, but that's not always the way. When you're, I love the picture, but we were in Mexico there for quite a while on Predator. Sonny Landon, who was one of my co-actors in that, we were with scorpions and spiders and coral snakes, these little wood ticks that they go through your clothing and they bury their bodies in your skin. The only way you get them out is with a match, and you put them on their tails and they back out of your flesh. Going through a few months of that is, how can I say, it's not being in Vancouver, And, but the picture, I think, Predator was really great working with those guys and everything, but the working conditions were... The first week we were there, interestingly enough, we had no tenting or screening in terms of when we ate, and the first week, we always had soup. Every day we had soup. Now we're talking about 110-degree weather out here and humidity. We always had this hot soup. And the first week, you're there, I was there, there'd always be invariably bugs in the soup. And, my God, you put that aside, the first week. Well, the second or third week, you just take them out and you drink the soup, because that's part of what the reality of being there is. We were up at 5 o'clock in the morning. We drive up this mountainous range into the heart of the jungle, get there around 6:15, 6:30, and you're there until dark. And no air conditioning, nothing, just there. It was a great experience for me in a lot of ways. But
it must have lent some authenticity to the experience you were portraying in the film, the rugged outdoor nature of the picture.
We had a few weeks of training before. As a commando sergeant that came in, that actually had to go through these calisthenics and climbing mountains, rappelling on ropes, the whole thing that we... So what the director wanted, the producer wanted, was a real sense of what it was like to be a commando, to be in the jungle, to live on your own, and the conditions, etc. So I think some of that came through in the film, and the actors, I think, we found that very, very beneficial.
You know, unfortunately, I think too many people in amateur sport believe that the reason, are led to believe, that the pinnacle of your competitive career is to win a gold medal at the Olympics. So it is the reason that you do sport. And you find these people, you get to the Olympics, and all the enjoyment that you may have had in the sport is not very evident there, because you're stuck in a situation for a number of weeks with thousands of incredibly stressed human beings, and the stress builds and builds, and everybody feels it, you know, and then you there seems to be a complete lack of perspective on what your real abilities are, what you really want to do in it. Every reporter from your country says you're going to win the gold medal, and they do it for every person from every country, no matter how long a shot it is. There's no realism left in it. There's no all the reality of why you've been in sport, where you really are in it, and what you're taking from it seems to be taken away by something that overwhelming. And I think it's really difficult because you're dealing with a lot of very young kids there too. I mean, you know, you put, well, I don't know, even if you put a bunch of adults in there, they might act exactly the same.
Right.
But at this point, they haven't gone through very much in their lives that allow them to deal with that kind of pressure. And I think most of them end up believing that it is what matters. Winning a gold medal is what matters, and if you don't do it, or you don't have the, or you don't go on to try and do it at a later date, there's no point in being in the sport.
If the youth are getting together, is there much humanity between individuals? And I mean just having friends from other countries and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think that's there. I think the Olympics, again, is a difficult place for any of that to occur. In smaller meets, smaller competitions, I think you'll always see that in all the sports. And that's how it feels like it should be. You can recognize that you can compete at any level, and the Olympics is just one. If we'd recognize it's just one of these big gala traditions, but that's all it is. It's just one more meet in any event. If we could recognize that, perhaps it would start to, at least for the athletes involved. I don't expect that some of the people who think that this is, some of the people that put it on,
Yes.
there's like Expo's huge, you know. Expo's just a fair. It's a fair. It's not really important to anybody's life, other than the few people that do it. High jumping is important to me, but it's not, it doesn't really affect anybody else's life.
You got to Montreal and had big hopes in Montreal, and no heighted. You didn't make over the first jump. What
I missed 3 times.
Missed 3 times, that's right. What did you have to go through to come to terms with that? Did you have much that you had to go through?
Well, yeah. I think that it was perhaps, you know, I think a lot of times you learn the best by the really devastating things in your life, the things that, I mean, my first reaction was to laugh, but it was because I was so, it was just like, again, something very ludicrous just happened. This doesn't make any sense. But I was pretty distressed about it, and I think what it did was, when I finally started thinking about it again, I knew that I knew how good of a jumper I was. I hadn't lost any sense of that, and I hadn't lost any of my sense of why I wanted to do it. And I came around and I had a feeling of, suddenly a lot of the weight of expectation had been removed. And I suppose, I don't really know why I missed 3 times. I mean, I can't, who knows? I can't find out. Perhaps that was the reason. That was my way of saying, I can't do it this way anymore. I have to be able to somehow get rid of all the pressure I'm feeling of people expecting things from me. And when I did no heighted, it was sort of like, well, you can't expect anything from me anymore, can you? I can do anything now.
Performance-enhancing drugs are obviously out of the closet. Has the scandal hurt the sport? And can we make anything out of the mess that there is?
I don't think that it really has hurt the sport at all. I think the sport will very, very easily survive all of this. I think it's hurt a lot of individuals, and I find that pretty sad, and most of them athletes. And I don't think that it'll be a problem for track and field to survive. It's an old sport, it's survived a lot of things.
Sure.
And I really don't think that'll be a problem. I do think changes will happen. Unfortunately, I don't, as far as I'm concerned, not nearly as fast as they need to. It's going to be a long time, and I think there'll be a lot more people who will be pretty disillusioned and will have the finger pointed at them and shook at them. And I think it's pretty sad what's happening now. I just feel like the way it's being handled, there are a lot of people being they're being punished.
Yes.
They're being punished for living a way that is a part of sport. That you may or may not agree with it. However, that is part of sport.
My first director was a giant, maybe the best, John Ford. You stood at attention when he gave you an order.
He was a military man.
Oh, you were scared to death. And the first film I made was a John Wayne film with Robert Montgomery. They Were Expendable by W.L. White, which was a story of the PT boats that took MacArthur out of the Philippines.
I Will Return.
Yes, I Shall Return, that's right.
thank
And he did, he finally did. But when Ford directed, and Ford I think won more Academy Awards than anybody, only he said cut, nobody else. If a sound man ran out of tape, he'd whisper in his ear, Mr. Ford, Mr. Ford. Nobody called him Jack, nobody called him John, not even Duke Wayne. He said, I've run out of tape. Ford said cut. Now you gotta understand that, okay? Because say you had a close-up that ran a minute and a half or 2 minutes, and you did your close-up. Today I'd know what to do, but in those days, I didn't know what to do. You do your close-up, and he let the camera run on and on and on for 4 or 5 minutes. Do you realize how long that is? Not knowing what to do. And he was expecting an accident. He was hoping for an accident. You talk about Actors Studio. I'm on the original board of the original Actors Studio. I don't know where it is. But Ford would change direction or dialogue or something, and he wouldn't let you rehearse it because he wanted an accident to happen. One of the greatest films of all time was The Informer, starring Victor McLaglen, the big, he once went 30 rounds with the Johnson heavyweight champion of the world. And it was about, The Informer was about a man who informed on the IRA, the Irish Republican Army, for money. And that was a part that he played, Victor McLaglen. And when Ford told you something, you did exactly what he told you. So he said, Vic, we're going to do pages at scene 75 through 79 tomorrow. Good night, goodbye. So he would go, Vic would go, Victor McLaglen. He kept everybody else there, and he rehearsed the scene. He lit it. We had the best black and white cameraman of all time, Joe August, shooting it. And he told each one of the actors around this circular thing that Victor's not going to know one word of dialogue because they purposely told him the wrong scene. So they rehearsed it. Each actor rehearsed so they could keep it going the next day, no matter what he did. And what happened was one of the greatest scenes in history. He came on the set, they were all lit, all the lights, they were all rehearsed. McLaglen comes on the set in the makeup with the dumb little cap that he wore, and Ford said, get out there, Victor. See that mark on the floor? You stand there, Vic. And he said to Joe, are we ready? And Joe said, yeah. Everybody else? Yeah. He said, the AD, roll him. They rolled him. He said, action. Where were you in the night of so-and-so? Ba-ba, ba-ba, ba-ba. And McLaglen went, didn't know one word. It was just an incoherent babbling, and it was brilliant. It won him the award. When the thing was over, Ford said, "Why don't you learn your goddamn lines?" And to the day he died, McLaughlin thought he had goofed. But that was Ford. I mean, to me, that's great directing. Because maybe he figured that intellectually or whatever other way, that he couldn't get that kind of reaction, that kind of honesty. Because he really didn't know what they were saying to him. He didn't know.
We had just finished the CBC annual fishing derby that day. It was a Saturday. And we'd had a few cocktails and so forth, and I wasn't driving, I was in a bus, so it was all perfectly above board. And we thought we'd go across to the local saloon to have a few more. And this flash flood occurred, and it was raining so hard, like only a prairie rainstorm can, that the street leading back to the CBC was literally flooded.
Right.
So there were three of us, and we all looked at each other and said, there's nothing else to do but let's swim for it. So literally, there was about this much water on the street, so we were doing a breaststroke up the street.
No.
And if you've ever done the breaststroke up a street, if you've never done it, you should.
Not up a
because
street, no.
It's quite an experience. So we, like a bunch of drowned rats, show up into the newsroom, and there's one reporter on it. She's going out of her mind because the entire city is flooded. I mean, the subways are flooded. The entire city's a mess. So we made some very, very strong coffee. And fortunately, there was a videotape editor and a cameraman with me, and we all started working. And I was on the phones. I had no intention of going on air. I mean, I hadn't shaved in 2 days, and, you know, I was really waterlogged and so forth, and my eyes were like this. But I got on the phones working, talking to the police and the fire department and towing companies, basically putting together material for another reporter who was to have come back to use on the air. But the reporter showed up like 60 seconds before airtime and said, well, I don't know this material. I don't know what to say. I don't know what to do. So I said, well, I've got the material. So in not one of my brighter moves, I pulled the material out and went into the studio. And the anchor at the time, the weekend anchor, just looked horrified as she saw me walk into the studio because literally I looked like a drowned rat. And sat down, and she said, okay, for the latest in the storm, here's Kevin Evans. And so bingo. And I caught sort of a look at me out of the monitor. I thought, oh, my Lord, what am I doing? And as I'm starting to go over this material, I could see through the window there into the studio the three buddies who I had been 20 minutes before swimming up Yonge Street with, looking into the studio, and they couldn't believe what they were seeing. So fortunately, it went smoothly, and we got the information across. But that time I was very nervous because I realized I was way out of my depth. I shouldn't have been on the air that night. But,
Way out of your depth, eh?
Way out of my depth, yes, pardon the pun.
Well, if you're going to be talking about a flood, you know, what better way than to show this is what it's like out
Well,
there?
actually, that's how I began. It's so bad. Something like, excuse my appearance, folks, but boy, it is really wet out there. And then I went on to how it's affecting life in Winnipeg that night. But that was a fun night. And fortunately, there was no tape of that one either. So.
Oh, too bad. You also, after the CBC Winnipeg news position, you anchored the Weekend National a couple of times. Now, I hear that there's a sacred chair at the National.
Well, I don't know how sacred it is, but I walked into the National studio the first time I was filling in on the weekend, and I went to sit down in the chair, as one would do if you're anchoring a newscast, and I sat down and I put the microphone on, and one of the studio, I suppose it was a floor director or one of the stage guys, came up and said, you can't sit in that chair. And I said, oh, okay, well, where should I sit then? I said, well, why can't I sit in the chair? And he says, well, because that's Knowlton's chair. Oh, okay, well, I wasn't aware there was a special chair for Knowlton, so I said, find me a non-Knowlton chair. And so they got me a little stool that I sat on. But they were quite horrified that I would sit in Knowlton's chair. And I told Knowlton Nash, who was the regular anchor of the National, about this the next day, and he got quite a chuckle out of it. He wasn't aware that he had a throne.
So it wasn't his chair that he deemed it to be so.
Oh, I don't think so.
Unwritten rule.
I guess so. I suppose so. I'm still not quite sure what that was all about, but it was certainly an interesting eye-opener to network television.
Nothing is funny except when people get involved in it. They are the people who make it funny. You can't make fun of Beethoven's Fifth. You can make fun of certain parts of it with musicians. But you must understand, they must know what you're doing. This is a mathematic development you can do of things, and say, if I do such and such with the music, it will come out. But the average person, the general audience, would never understand what it was. They would say, what is that supposed to be funny? But fun is not necessarily something that you slip in a banana peel. That's not necessarily fun either, because you can hurt yourself terribly.
True.
But the degrees of everything we are talking about, or everything that happens in the world, it depends on the need for it and the desire, and the ability to reflect it.
When you're on stage and the audience isn't laughing at the right moments, do you try something new ever?
Well, I always try something new. It's not trying, it is my performance depends on, I have said also in the interview that what disturbed me were any noise and any distraction from the room silence or whatever you are surrounded with. That becomes now, when I'm not depending on my fingers, part of the entertainment, because I pick it up, I use it, because every situation is the now, and that becomes the show. So I go on the stage and I have, like the good cook, he has in his kitchen certain ingredients, and he knows how to put them together, he knows how to present them, and so do I. I have ingredients that I can present, and I know exactly the reaction to it, and when I need this, maybe a little more salt or that, or on that, or maybe a little more sugar on this, and then maybe a little more vegetables in it, and the soup may be a little too hot, or maybe a little too cold.
There's no exact proportion or measurement.
No.
This is experience.
It is ad lib, and everything I do on the stage, except the phonetic punctuation, which we have been talking about on other occasions, nothing has ever been prepared. It is all growing out of ad libs,
Reality.
and situations, and what's the word?
True occurrences.
Yes.
Mm. So you're a satirist too. I think you once said that.
Well, I
about
guess
yourself.
humor is satire in itself.
Mm. How about when you fall off your bench? Do you still do that?
I don't fall off it. You see, what is not particularly known by the general public is that pianists generally sit on a leather, a little bench, an elevator bench.
Yes.
Like
Piano bench.
A piano bench, which is leather topped, and then you can elevate it or lower it, a little mechanism there. I use a wooden bench, but I don't know if you get it. And that's polished. They're all black and polished, because I have things, I have the book in it, I have music in it, I have all kind of little things that I might need, and I want a handkerchief, and that opens and closes, whereas the regular bench doesn't. But sitting on that polished wood doesn't mean that you are just bound to sit here. You slide back and forth if you are not careful. And this started many years ago when I saw a pianist. He was playing the Tchaikovsky concerto, and he didn't have one of those elevator benches, and he had a wooden bench, and apparently he was not used to sit on it, because in the beginning, the first few bars of the piano entrance, where he plays the boom, 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 he slid right off the piano, boom, 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 and landed on the floor. And I was there, and I saw it. I was about 8 or 9 years old.
Did you laugh?
Oh gosh, these people jump up. They were terrible, and he brushed it off. I don't know what happened. It was just, I was the only one who laughed because I thought it was so funny. Everybody he thought the man had killed himself or something like that. But apparently he didn't kill himself. So he continued and he played, and the way he played, he could have killed himself or should have. Anyway. But that's another story. So everything I do is always inspired by some actual happening. And that is what makes it funny, if you recognize it.
The common chord that can be found with all of these individuals is their commitment and passion for their chosen careers. I'm George Orr. Join me next time for more Conversation Snapshots.